was April the 6th, in the year 32 AD, and something amazing had just happened. For the first time in his earthly ministry, Jesus allowed himself to be widely and openly proclaimed as Messiah the King, God's anointed King, the coming King. It was a special day. It was a specific day. It was a day when the multitudes of his disciples sang a song to him, declaring, "Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord," quoting Psalm 118. It was a day when the Pharisees yet again rebuked him and rebuked his disciples for insinuating that he was God. It was an amazing day. It was an expected day. It was a day that's important to us today as we evangelize the lost. Welcome to another episode of A Christian in Canada Presents. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of A Christian in Canada Presents. I've been working on this video for 2 weeks, well, close to 3 weeks now. I've been wanting to do it for a long time, but it's been 2 weeks in the recording process. I started out wanting to make it very, very complicated with every detail possible, all the arguments and all the interesting things about the subject. But probably what's most helpful is just to keep it simple. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stick to the facts, and I'm going to put information up on the screen and probably more down in the information box. And so I'm going to stick to the facts, and you can get a lot of the details by looking at the information. We're talking about the 9th chapter of Daniel. Now, Daniel was probably written about 600 years before Jesus Christ was born. But we know for sure that it was translated from Hebrew into Greek 270 years before he was born. That's because at that time, the Septuagint was completed. Now, the Septuagint is a Greek translation of the Old Testament scriptures that was done by 70 Hebrew scholars, and that's why it's called the Septuagint. That means the 70. This establishes the scriptures in history. So we know that they haven't been tampered with. This prophecy wasn't injected into the book of Daniel after Jesus was born and somebody wanted to confirm him. It actually looked forward over the centuries to the time when he would enter Jerusalem as Messiah the King. So let's talk about it. The 9th chapter of Daniel says that from the going forth of the decree to rebuild Jerusalem unto Messiah the King will be 69 weeks of years. Sounds cryptic, but it's really not. It's very specific, and it's going to be just simple math for us to figure this whole thing out. Now, Daniel had been praying because the 70 years of exile that had been decreed for Israel by God because of their disobedience was about to be up. And he was praying to God. He was longing for their freedom. And an angel came to him and gave him another prophecy. This time, not just 70 years, but 70 weeks of years are decreed upon your people. And from the going forth of the decree to rebuild Jerusalem unto Messiah the King will be 69 weeks of years. And then Messiah the King will be cut off, but not for himself. That's an amazing prophecy. So let's look into history. We look back to the book of Nehemiah, the 2nd chapter of Nehemiah, and we find the decree to rebuild Jerusalem. Now, there's lots of theories about other decrees that might fit this prophecy, but this is the only one that lines up with the king, and his year is 14th year, I believe, of office, and at the end of the prophecy lines up with the actual crucifixion of Jesus Christ. So we know the beginning season of Jesus' earthly ministry, and we know that he had 4 Passovers in his ministry. He was crucified on the 4th Passover. And we know the dates of these things. So we know the start date, which happens to be the 14th of March, BC 445, and we know the end date, which is the 6th of April, AD 32. Now these things line up. The start date we find, because we're told that the decree was in the month of Passover, the month Nisan, and decrees were given out during the new moon, and that month started with the observation. So we see that he gave that on the 1st of Nisan, or the 14th of March of that year, and now we count 69 weeks of years. That's 69 times 7 times 360 days. So a prophetic year is 360 days. And we know that from Genesis and throughout the Bible. I'm going to put a bunch of scriptures up here to help you with that. So we count 69 times 7 times 360 days. We find 17,880 days. It's just math. Very, very simple math. So then we can count 17,880 days from the 14th of March, BC 445, and we see where that takes us. And it takes us to the 6th of April, AD 32. And we can see that that lines up with the a few days before the 4th Passover of Jesus Christ's ministry. And we know that he started his ministry according to these details. Write them down, keep them. So we know the beginning date and the end date. We convert for leap years, it works perfectly. Okay, so what does this have to do with evangelism? Well, God says that a prophet is a true prophet if what he says comes true. And God says that he declares the end from the beginning. So he's a prophet. He's prophesying the future. And we can see if he's true based on if what he says is going to happen actually happens. So when we're witnessing with people, sometimes people will say that, well, the prophecies of the Bible are very cryptic and they can mean just about anything. That generally tells me that the person hasn't really spent much time reading the Bible, because they're not cryptic. They're very specific. They're very detailed. And this one is grounded in history. It's just simple math, so it's easy to test. So some prophecies that people might be familiar with that they would think are cryptic would be like the prophecies of Nostradamus. They're wordy, crazy things, and they sort of fit multiple situations, and they're not really testable. So I think people tend to think that the Bible's like that, because most people really haven't read it. They'll tell you that they've read parts of it. They'll tell you that it's got mistakes in it, or that the prophecies are cryptic, but they can't really show you one that is. They can't show you a mistake. I have yet to have somebody show me a credible, real mistake in the Bible. Lots of interpretation. And so that's what I want you to realize, is you need to read your Bible in a plain fashion. Use the historical grammatical hermeneutic. And that's just a hermeneutic is your philosophy for translation or interpretation. And so the historical grammatical hermeneutic demands that if something says it's allegory, that you read it as allegory. But if it isn't allegory, then you read it exactly as it is, and it means exactly what it says. So because I look at the Bible that way, I can look at this prophecy, and I can look back at history, and I can test either the Bible is true, and the prophecy works, or the Bible's false, and the prophecy doesn't work. But it turns out that history confirms that the prophecy is true. And because that prophecy was written hundreds of years before the events, it tells me that this is an accurate prophecy, and it is a divine document, divinely looking into the future, specifically saying this is going to happen on this date, and it did. So when we're witnessing with people, we can share this prophecy with them as a testimony to the credibility of the scriptures. That will help them come to faith. That will help give you credibility. So one interesting thing that I want to add on to this is that this prophecy, the dates in it, demand that Jesus was crucified on a Thursday, not a Friday. You've probably heard of Good Friday. Guess what? Jesus wasn't crucified on Good Friday. Good Friday lines up with a weekend. It lines up with a pagan celebration. Passover celebrations for the church got moved to this celebration to help join the community together, I assume. I think the Catholic Church had something to do with that, but it's just a tradition. You'll hear lots of people try to explain how Friday to Sunday somehow magically equals 3 days and 3 nights that Jesus said he would be in the ground. It doesn't. You can say, well, part of a night and part of a day counts as a full day because he was there during that day. But people know that's just word games. No, he was crucified on Thursday. And from Thursday to Sunday, we have 3 days and 3 nights. Exactly like what he said it was going to be. That's the sign. That's the only sign that people desiring a sign for proof that God is true are going to be given. Jesus said, this is their only sign. So let's not mess it up. Let's look at the scriptures. It says when these things happened, and let's portray them accurately, because this is people's hope. This is how we can reach people. Trust your Bible. Read it as it is written. Don't try to put your own interpretation on it, because you will always mess it up, just like I would. I believe that Jesus Christ died for my sins at the appointed day, in the appointed way. I believe he was in the ground for 3 days and 3 nights, and that he rose again to life, and he was seen by more than 500 credible witnesses over many days. I believe that God has accepted his sacrifice on my behalf, and that he has bought my salvation. And that makes me a Christian in Canada. What about you?